Hi everyone, welcome back to the Sports Psych Show. Thanks so much for joining me. Now, this week I'm speaking with a good friend of mine, Coach Reed Maltbie. Reed, how are you?
I'm doing fabulous. Excited to have this chat with you today.
Yeah, no, well, it's great to have you on. We've been talking about getting you on the Sports Psych Show for such a long time. And it's fantastic you're on now because I believe you started a new venture. So, listen, why don't you tell the Sports Psych Show audience exactly who you are, what you've been doing over the course of your, is it 30 years of coaching? Or am I giving
almost.
Almost 30 years ago. So I'm giving you a few years there. I do apologise. And also, look, what is this new venture all about?
Sure, happy to. So and there might be many people that don't know me, I started coaching when I was 16 years old and realized that for the longest time it was just a side hobby and something I loved and a passion project, and went and got a master's in sports psychology so I could be a coach for a living, but then never had the guts to actually say, hey, I could do this full time. So I was that working stiff who coached in the evenings. And one day my wife said, you're miserable during the day, but you're so on fire at night. Why don't you go and get an education degree and see if you can't bridge the two? So I went and got a master's in early childhood education, early childhood development, and taught for 1 year, and then had the opportunity at the end of that year to go full-time coaching, which I never thought would happen. So I started coaching full-time. I've run clubs. I've been an executive director of clubs, a director of coaching, primarily all of it in soccer. And then in 2015, I got talked into doing a TEDx talk in Cincinnati, and it was on the power of a coach's words and the impact they have on the brains of our children. And that sort of pushed me in a completely different direction that, hey, this is a platform where we can reach more kids and more coaches and have a much deeper impact on the world if we start talking about this in a larger public sphere and just not in my club with my people. So I embarked on this career where I've been speaking and working with organizations around the world for 3 years. I was with Changing the Game Project as the lead speaker and chief of content. So you probably see a lot of my stuff out on Changing the Game.
Yep.
And now I'm on my own. I'm headed in a direction. I've been working with Jane Nelson from Positive Discipline. So I'm headed in a direction on social emotional learning and brain science and childhood development pieces and how they impact sports. And so I started a company called Raising Excellence. And the whole idea is that there is a way that we can be raising excellence with every child and teaching them to chase their excellence every day. And so what does that look like for coaches? And what's interesting is I've done 7 workshops on the excellence equation now, and I've done them with grassroots all the way up through America's Cup coaches from U.S. Sailing and stuff like that, and it resonates no matter what the age of our athletes or what the level of our athletes. This basic human psychology and the software of the brain is really starting to resonate with coaches.
So what does the excellence equation look like, Reed? Can you take us through that?
Yes. So while Jane and I were working on the tool cards, so Jane had been in the positive discipline space for about 40 years working in education and parenting. And so she's got books out on positive discipline in the classroom and positive discipline for parents and positive discipline, keeping joy in the marriage. And she came to me and said, I really want to go into the coaching realm. I think this has a place. So we started researching, working on the cards in the book a few years back. And while we were writing the cards, I really kept seeing these words just kept popping up: competence and significance and capability and belonging, and those, they resonated with me. And so I started doing a word search in our cards and in the research I was doing, and realized those words just came up everywhere. And it links back to Bandura and Cone and basic human needs and Adolf Dreikers and all that. So excellence equation is the idea. I said to Jane one day, Jane, what if we're only getting half of the equation right when we talk about athlete performance? And she said, well, what do you mean? And I said, well, we focus on the outcomes. We focus on the physical world. We focus on the things we can touch and manage and measure. And we set these arbitrary levels like, well, all swimmers at this time, they are considered excellent. Everybody else below that time, you're not. And I said, but the problem is the hardware only runs as well as the software installed. And so what if we're missing, and we've got all these sports psychologists out there who get that, who see that, you see it. So what if we could get coaches to understand that instead of writing malware, what if we're writing great code on the brains of our kids with very simple things? Because you get psychology for the volunteer coach is tough. That's not an area you want to go into. But being able to show them that it's not psychology, it's basic human needs, it's social emotional learning. If they could just add these pieces to the puzzle, what would the equation look like then? And so the equation for me became that creating belonging, feelings of significance, and competence in our kids unlocks the ability for them to perform peak ability physically. And so if we add those pieces of the puzzle and practice in some very simple ways, then all what we're doing is removing fear. And when we remove fear, peak performance goes up. And so that's the basic premise. And I've been, like I said, I did like 7 workshops now where we're really exploring it. And it's not me. I sit with the coaches and I ask them, what does belonging look like? What is competence? What did it feel like when you felt like you belonged to something bigger than yourself? And we just go through it. And so now I have all these data points, a couple hundred data points behind each of those words, but what it looks like and what it means to coaches and to athletes.
When you say software driving the hardware, I mean, you know my opinion on this. We've spoken about it quite a few times, whether it's been on your podcast or my passion is to drive through this notion that the psychosocial sides of coaching, of being within sport, drive the technical, tactical and physical sides of the game. And it sounds like your excellence equation is very much down that line, the software driving the hardware.
It is. And Dan, I got to be honest, it's the whole quote of, if I see farther today, it's because I stood standing on the shoulders of giants, and it's that same idea. I'm just standing on the shoulders of giants. And it's guys like you. It's friends of mine that I've made over the years that I look at your work and your research and I go, man, he is on to something. And so the excellence equation isn't anything new, but it's all about the software. And what's really funny is, 7 workshops, several hundred coaches and administrators, parents, et cetera. I always ask them the question of going back to the history of IBM and Microsoft. And I ask them if they've heard of this particular name. And nobody ever knows the name. Nobody ever knows this person's name. Okay. And then I say, do you know who Bill Gates is? And everybody raises their hands. And I point out the fact that Bill Gates squared off with IBM mainframes at one point in time, and when they were going into the personal computing realm. And the head of the personal computing realm at the time was a rock star in the industry and was a king. And Bill Gates was this kid. Yep. And the two of them fought back and forth over the hardware specs and working together and everything like that. And finally, the guy says to him, he says, Bill, I don't care about your software. It's the hardware that matters. And Bill Gates said, okay, well then do me a favor, put my software on every one of your computers. I mean, I'm distilling it in real simple terms, but basically Bill Gates talked them into putting the software on every IBM computer. Mm-hmm. To this day, whose name do we remember?
Mr. Gates.
Mr. Gates.
Yeah.
And so when you put it that way to people, it's like, oh my gosh, and you talk about Silicon Valley. What's most important in Silicon Valley? Is it the hardware, or who are the people that are really being the rock stars? It's the people writing the software around the hardware. And so, or I'll say to a group of coaches, hey, have you ever had your computer freeze up or get malware on it? And does it perform for you when you have too many windows open or when you've downloaded some bad software? And they go, no, I hate it. It's horrible. It doesn't perform at all. It's really slow, and its processing is not good, and things are freezing up. Well, okay, wait. What does it look like when we've overloaded our athletes to the point where their processing is slow, where they're underperforming? So is there the possibility that we're maybe writing malware on our athletes' brains, just like we can download malware into the software of a machine? You see, the hardware only runs as good as the code and the software that's used to run it. That's why there's always updates on our phones and stuff. It's because they find new ways to get bigger, better, faster, internally first, and then externally it's displayed.
I love that term you used, imprinting great code on the brain. And coming back to that notion of software driving hardware and being a psychosocial coach, to use my colloquialism, it always confuses me why coaching courses, the level 1s, the level 2s, if you like it, across all sports, don't seem to include these things, whether it's competence, significance, belonging, whether it's basic psychological skills training, whether it's a basic framework for communication, whether it's the kind of thing that you would have learned in your masters in early development, childhood development, related to good teaching, for instance, teaching taxonomies, etc. We are coaching human beings, and when we coach human beings, we coach needs, wants, hopes, doubts, beliefs, expectations, cultures, backgrounds, individual differences, personalities. Surely that is the soft skills are the hard skills, aren't they, Reed?
They are. But the problem is we can't see them. We can't measure them. We can't put a finger on them. And because we can't, it's really hard for somebody that doesn't have the advanced degrees or done the research or anything to get it and understand it. I mean, it's, for me, flying in a plane, I look at this and say, there's no way I actually comprehend how this thing stays in the air. But to, an aerospace engineer, it's simple. And so I think that's the problem, is it's scary and it's unknown. And so it's a lot of times it's pushed aside. It's called a soft skill. And soft skill drives me nuts because it makes it seem like it's not as important. But it really is the hard skill, because your athletes, like you said, they're human beings, and they're dealing with so many other things beyond the game itself that if we're not able to get their head in the right space before they perform, then we've lost them before they ever step on the field.
Absolutely. I'm just reflecting there back on your competence and significance, and one of the whether it's a video or it's a picture you posted recently of when you were coaching soccer, and you had the players, very, very, very young players, I can't remember if they were 8 or 9 or 10, they were a very young age, were forming a huddle, and you had stepped back about 10 meters or so, and you were allowing the players to talk, to brainstorm, to talk. I wouldn't like to think what some of the parents were whispering on the sidelines. I'd certainly be applauding it, looking at it, and thinking, if that's my child there, I'd be fantastic. My child is becoming more sport smart. So tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah, so it's interesting. That is the slide I show during my workshops to coaches when we start talking about ownership and how ownership lends into both the pieces of significance, and actually lends to all three, but primarily in significance and competence. That happened because I had a group of kids who were their parents were type A personalities, very driven, very successful people. They wanted great success for their kids, but they approached it the right way. But because of it, these kids were very driven and very engaged and passionate. And from the very beginning, I got this group, and I was guilty like any coach. I went out and I picked the 13 biggest, fastest, strongest, best players at that time. They'd won the biological lottery, right? So at 11 years old, these are the best 11-year-olds. That doesn't mean they're going to be the best when they're 20-something. It just, that's how we do it. So, but because I get these kids, I inherit these, I create this team of these kids. They come to me from the very beginning and they just say, Coach, we want power. We want to be able to have a say in what we're doing. We want, these kids come to me at 11 and ask for this stuff. Of course, I'm like, well, that's because they were raised in that culture with their parents where it's like go-getter, active, proactive. Great. I said, what you want is you want influence. So here's what we're going to do, guys. And I started simple, and I said, because I was so afraid to let go of the reins because I'm, commander of the ship, right? That's the mentality with coaching. It's the archaic mentality. I'm in charge and I have all the answers, so I'll let you think you're in charge, but I've got to remain. So in the beginning, it was limited choices. So, do you want to play game A or B at the end of practice? And then it was, okay, Monday's practice is either going to be about X or Y. Which one do you want to do? And that was pieces like that. And then it became, okay, I let you run and warm up at practice. And then it just sort of snowballed. And all of a sudden one day, I'd been doing it with my high school team just because I had captains, who were chosen by the team themselves. I'd let the captains run halftime. So I did it with these 11-years. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to give you, in the next game, I'm going to give you a couple minutes at halftime where you're going to actually run yourselves, and then I'll come back. And so the halftime came, and the very first time I looked at him and said, you got 2 minutes or 3 minutes. I don't remember the exact number, but it was limited. And Mark Bennett and I talk about it. It was at least limited. I didn't give him, the moon. And I said, you got 2 or 3 minutes, and I want you to think about something that went really well in the first half that you want to continue to focus on. And I also want you to think about something you want to try in the second half. I didn't say what went wrong. I didn't get them on the negative. I thought, can they find a solution to a problem that they had? Instead of identifying the problem, let's identify the solution. So I said, I want you to think about something you want to try or do in the second half. I'll be back. And I came back after a couple minutes. And, of course, I have my clipboard. And that's what the picture is it's me, like you said, it's me like 10 meters away from the kids, and I'm crouched and I'm writing on my clipboard what I saw. I come back and they say, this is what we saw, Coach, this and this. And I went, okay, no. So here's what we're going to do. I vetoed, right? Veto power. Well, it evolved. It was like, Reed, these kids are really sharp, and they're the ones playing the game. They're actually seeing more than you. Maybe you should let them have a say. So it evolved into mid-season. I'm coming back, and they're saying, we saw this and this. And I'm like, wow, yeah, I got the same thing, guys. That's great stuff. And we do it. By the end of the season, I kid you not, there were times where I would come back with my whiteboard and they would say, "Coach, this and this," and I'd look at my whiteboard and I'd slowly erase it and go, "Yeah, I had that too," and toss it to the side because I didn't even see what they saw. It didn't even occur. Like, they were seeing a different game from me, and I never quite fully grasped it until Steve Kerr did it with his guys with the Golden State Warriors and said, these are the pros. They're on the court. They're the ones in the game. They're the ones that have been training. They see things I don't see. Why not let them run a timeout? And it clicked. Years later, I went, that's what it was. These boys were in the game, and they were not only that, but going back to the software piece, they were bringing to the game their own experience, their own perspective, all of those quote-unquote soft skills that the world had given, that they had developed in the world. So they saw the game differently than I did because I'm seeing the game from the lens and the software that was installed in me 30 years ago. So I see a different game than them. Anyway, it spiraled. They challenged me to do it with my 8-year-old girls team. So now I'm doing it with 12-year-olds at this point and 8-year-olds. And it still happened the same way. The 8-year-olds were funny because the first time they did it, we get to halftime and they say to me, I said, "What do you want to do?" And it's like, "Oh, we're going to ride in on unicorns shooting lasers." And, it's like they came up with the coolest stuff. They're 8 years old. But then as time goes by, I get one dad who says, "What are you doing to my daughter? She's wanting to get up at 6 a.m. to watch English Premier League games so she can prepare for the games."
Oh, wow. Brilliant.
Because, you assign your captains at the beginning of the game. You're like, you're captains today. And then they run halftime. And so these kids were like, oh, my gosh. But so at one point, I'm standing there, and I'm at the midline talking to the other coach or something. I couldn't sit during games. I had to stand at least up along the sideline and pace it like a caged lion. I finally broke myself of even saying anything. That was hard enough, but I hear dead silence behind me. And I'm thinking, oh, goodness gracious, there's a playground not more than like 15, 20 meters away. I guarantee you that those girls are all over on the playground playing because I have not paid attention to the ones on my bench in the last minute or two. Right. And that there are parents on the sideline thinking I'm the worst person on the face of the earth, and they're already calling child services on me, right? I turn around, and they're all sitting on the team bench, heads resting on hands, watching the game intently. And I sit down next to him, and I go, "Girls, what gives?" And they go, "Shh, halftime." Like, they were so focused on the game because they wanted to add something of value to the halftime conversation. So, yes, going back to the parents. Parents thought I was nuts. They would take pictures of it and post it on social media, say Coach has lost his mind. But I was always transparent with my parents and would explain to them why I'm doing what I'm doing. And when I would say that, they thought it was the coolest thing in the world because it's like letting your baby have his first steps. They've got to fall, and you don't run and pick them up right. You go, wait, see how they react, right? And see if they can get themselves back up type of thing. And they saw it that way. It was like he's releasing the reins on these kids and letting them own the experience, but he's still there to help guide when they need him. And so it took a while for some of the parents, but most of them they jumped right in because they had never seen somebody sort of like release the ownership over to the kids like that.
The 3 words I've written down as you're speaking there are engagement, competence, and confidence. So by handing over ownership, by being that autonomy supportive coach, you engaged the players, you increased their competence because they had to brainstorm, they had to come up with solutions, they had to think, essentially, and confidence. I mean, they experienced more conversation amongst their peers. They would have experienced some success of making suggestions about various things and then going and implementing those things. So engagement, competence, and confidence, I think it's a perfect storm.
It is, and that lends right into that whole belonging, competence, and significance. Yeah. If you feel competent, you want to be there. You want to be engaged. You there's this power. You suddenly put a cape on and you have a superpower, right? And if you feel like you belong to a safe group, a group of people who value you for who you are and what you bring to the table, then you're more likely to share with them and you're more likely to grow with them. And then, of course, it all leads into that whole significance. Everybody, no matter who we are, we search for the meaning of life. 42 is the meaning of life if you're a fan of Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy.
Yeah.
We,
Adams, yeah.
we all search for it, right? We spend our whole lives saying, this is why I'm here. I think it was Mark Twain who said, 2 greatest days of your life are the day that you realize that what your purpose is and the day that you chase it or whatever, So everybody wants to feel, it's not just belong. They don't want to feel like look, I can feel like I belong to a group and I can feel like I bring a skill to the group. But I also feel like that I have to have this deep, meaningful value, if that makes sense. And it's so different from the others. And by giving ownership, we're starting to tap into that deep, meaningful value. So when I was going through this, I said to Jane, these are the 3 pieces of the puzzle for me. And like you said, you can write down, I can come up with 15 or 20 character words or concepts behind each of those. Belonging means blah, 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 So, but those are the 3 I landed on. And she says, I've always put significance and competence as one and the same. And so do the researchers. If you look at it, Reed, it's belonging and competence. Those are the 2 big ones. And she said, so all I want you to do is find a way to explain to me that you think significance matters as a standalone. And I couldn't. I couldn't. And then my kids are in Civil Air Patrol, which is like the auxiliary for the Air Force, like, scouts for the Air Force. And I know nothing about aerospace. I know nothing about drilling. I know nothing about their uniforms. I know nothing about the military. I was not a military kid. I was not so I'm not an engineer. So we've got all these former military people and we've got all these aerospace people who are all helping the kids. And here I am, and I'm a coach. And so it's the one place, it's interesting, my wife teases me because it was the one place where she was important because she had all these skills she brought to the table. And so every night we'd walk in and go, Amy, great, you're here. We need you for this. And they'd go, Reed, can you go stand outside with them while they drill with so-and-so? Sure. And it wasn't like they didn't know how to use it. It was just I didn't bring a skill to the table. Now I know full well what my skills are because it was, anywhere else I go, I bring hey, I'm here. What do you need from me? I'll mentor your coaches. I'll talk to your parents. I knew I had skill and I knew I could help these kids with like character development. Yep. And I felt like I belonged because they'd be like, hey, Reed, how are you? And the kids would all come up and say, good evening, sir. And so I belonged to this group and I dressed like them. So there was a belonging and there was a competence, but I didn't feel any deep, meaningful value to that group. I said that to one of my commanders. And he says, if we do a mission and the only skill that you bring to the table is, he says, you can't fly the planes, you're not this and that, that's great. He says, what if we said, Reed, we need to make sure the radios are charged and that they're all on the same channels and that everybody's in the loop. He said, that's all we want you to do. Charge radios, recharge radios, and get them out to people, make sure they're on the same channels. Yep. He says, is that important to us? I said, I think I know where you're going, but go ahead and unpack it. And he said, if communication fails, the mission fails. This big moving machine of hundreds of people searching in the mountains for a downed airplane or searching in the mountains for lost hikers, it comes to a screeching halt if you don't charge the radios and you don't have them set to the right frequencies. Everything depends on what you do. Now do you feel like you are important to us and have meaning? And I said, well, yeah, I will charge those radios the best I've ever done. I called Jane the next day and said, I figured out what significance is. It's a very different feeling. It's the why, right? And you talk about it. Even at the youngest of ages, kids want a why. And giving them ownership gives them a part of that why. Because it's no longer I'm playing because mom and dad are making me, or I'm doing this because coach told me it's what I need to do. They're coming up with it. And they're saying, I'm doing this because at halftime I made this suggestion and we decided to implement this. This is my why.
It's funny, because as you're speaking there, I'm thinking about self-determination theory, and so much of this is self-determination theory, isn't it? It's that
yes.
That theory of motivation that I think coaches so often forget. Coaches sort of tend to trade from a motivational perspective in terms of winning. Primarily, but what we know in psychology is that most motivation is multi-dimensional, and I think every psych and every coach who's interested in this area will interpret self-determination slightly different. And the 3 you've got: competence, significance, and belonging. And I know you haven't said self-determination, but that's essentially how I'm translating it. And for me, self-determination is fun, mastery, and meaning. So the mastery is essentially the competence piece. I use meaning for your significance. I also have fun there, but there's a real relationship there with belonging, I think. So it's funny how you can trade words around, but we're very much coming from the same direction.
Oh, very much. And I told you, this is nothing new. One of the feedbacks I got for one of the workshops was, this is nothing new. You just said it in a way that I went, okay, now I'm on board.
Yeah. No, absolutely. And you mentioned standing on the shoulders of giants. Well, if I'm certainly standing on the shoulders of giants, and I think both of us are very tall at the moment because there's a lot of giants bearing our weight, basically, because there's a lot of incredible people historically who have come up with these theories, devised and researched them, and come up with fabulous ways to get these ideas across. They really have. So,
they have.
That's so imperative.
And they've been ignored, right? I mean, for the longest time, these giants in this quote-unquote soft skill world have been largely left out, or they're just bullet points in a massive conversation for our coaches. Like, we're not seeing the software as vital as the hardware. And so everything is hardware-based. I mean, I just saw that a league came out with its combine scores, and it was all height, vertical leap, speed. I'm like, that's great, but what are you doing for the other piece of the puzzle? I'll share with you a real quick conversation. I won't say where, I won't say what sport, I won't say who, but I was at a think tank at one point in time. It was a small conference, and there were a lot of people there, a small group of people there, and there were some pretty good experts there, and we're sitting in the expert room, and one of the people says, you know what, I'm driving me nuts is these sports psychologists that are out there that empower these coaches to then mess with kids' heads. And I don't say a word. I just sit and listen. And the person says, they make it seem like it's so accessible and easy and everything, and then coaches who don't know what they're doing go off and mess up the heads of these kids and everything. And it's very and I'm just done with that. And it has no place in sport. Well, this person was an extremely influential person in a particular sport, in a particular region. And I went, wow. I mean, that's so far from the truth. It's not that we're giving them a license to mess with kids' heads. They already are. And when we do licensing courses and stuff where we don't teach them what psychology is and we think they can treat 8-year-olds like adults, or we model a behavior in that licensing course that's totally inappropriate, and then all of the coaches in that course model the instructor, we're already writing the malware. And how many of us as coaches in our lifetime have inherited a kid that we go, holy cow, I got some work to do here. Somebody's really messed with this kid. So it's not that we're giving coaches a license to mess with kids. We're trying to help coaches reverse any accidental malware that we've already installed. And so the whole point with, like you and I are talking, the whole point with me is I'm wanting to do the opposite. I'm trying to distill it in something so simple that anyone can do it. It's the Napoleon, excuse the expression, but I just learned this from a friend of mine. It's Napoleon's idiot concept, right? Writing stuff for the think tank, and I wrote it out and said, I wonder if this makes sense. So I grabbed my 13-year-old and said, read this. And he goes, I know exactly what the think tank is. You're doing this, 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 and this. I'm like, sweet. And I sent the email off, and Ruth Nicholson of Go, who's one of my partners in the think tank, goes, you used Napoleon's idiot. She goes, not that your kid is, but Napoleon, when he wanted to make sure that his generals understood the orders he was writing, he would have one of his pages or somebody like that read it, a young person read it, and if it made sense to them, it would make sense to the generals, and it became the term Napoleon. And I was like, well, that's what I'm trying to do, is I'm trying to get coaches to realize you don't need a master's in psychology, but you better understand it or you're going to wield an extremely dangerous weapon, and that's the problem. And that's where pseudoscience and hack psychology comes in. So if you understand that all you need to do is self-determination theory, create a sense of belonging in your kids. Find ways to make them feel competent about what they're doing, and make sure there's a deep-seated meaning of why there. If you do those things, what you're doing is you're at least giving them some tools to mentally and emotionally be engaged and be safe. So I just thought I'd share that story, that we got to stop ignoring the scientists out there who have the same kind of hard, peer-reviewed, empirical data around psychology and sociology and all that as the physical ones do. We've got to start finding ways to make it so that it's understood by a lot of coaches, and they have very simple solutions that they can use. Your game face is brilliant. That's one of the reasons why I love it. It's like so accessible, makes so much sense. Anybody can use it, and it's doing good rather than, listen, we know this for a fact. What we don't know is far worse than what we know. Like that's that, what we know, what we don't know mentality of it can be very dangerous if you don't know something.
Let's just unpack, because I think sometimes we're guilty of and the podcasts I listen to, and we're guilty of having conversations where we go, well, this is what we know and this is what we believe, and the coaches who don't believe this are wrong. And I sincerely think they are wrong. However, I understand that nobody, by and large, 99.9% of coaches step into a coaching ring to do good, to help. Some of them are ill-informed. Some of them just go about things in the wrong way. So, I mean, let's just together try and unpack why that is. I mean, you've hit upon a great point, and it's a point I make constantly, which is some coaches just find it too difficult to understand, and I think there is a I don't know, burden is the right word, but there's an onus on the sports psychology or psychology community and the coaching science community to tailor their language and to scaffold their ideas so that all coaches, it's as accessible as possible to all coaches. So it's a kind of an Occam's razor. It's simple, but no simpler, if that makes sense. So it describes what its value. But what else is there? Because I think, I go back to your coaching behaviours that you were describing when you empowered players to find their own solutions. And I suppose one has to accept there are going to be coaches, there are going to be people who say, well, hang on, are we doing the players a disservice when we do that? And Reed, I don't believe that, but I'm just saying, playing devil's advocate here. Are we doing the players a disservice because then they are missing an opportunity to be educated in the stuff that I know as a coach because I've studied long hours to know tactics and techniques, etc. So what would your response to that be?
I have a couple responses. One is because I've had those parents or people who've complained because a coach didn't speak much during a game on Sunday afternoon, and she's not doing her job, or he's not doing his job. And my answer is, listen, if a coach is spending all of Sunday afternoon screaming out and joysticking the athletes, that person didn't do his or her job during the week, because Sunday's test day. Right, the math teacher doesn't stand there and say, no, carry the one. Oh, you screwed up that one too. Get on my bench. Joey, go do the multiplication. It's like, so if you're so worried on Sunday when they're doing the test and performing in front of others that they're going to mess up, then you didn't do your job during the week, right? I mean, we get all week to do that. Second piece of that puzzle is yes and no. See, the thing is I didn't say they had all of halftime. And I didn't release reins fully until I felt like they'd really grown into that. It's like Mark Bennett when he talks about the PDS and the 1, 2, 3. I don't fully release the reins until I know they're fully capable. Just like we don't give a kid turns 16, we don't hand them the keys to the car and a license and say, you're a driver. No. They drive with help, with somebody that actually has access to a brake and stuff for a while. Then they drive with a person who doesn't have access, and then they drive, and then so they do all that to lead up to it before we say, here are the keys and a license, you're good to go. So as a coach, I gave them some of the halftime, and then I came back and we reconvened, and I still had my chance to coach. But I also use a thing called the 110-1 rule in games, because I realized that basic psychology, again, this is another way to access psychology. Yelling at people from 100 yards is just yelling. Whether I'm yelling positive or negative, it's just yelling, and it's interrupting and distracting their flow performance. Yelling them at 10, so I don't want to use hand signals. Thumbs up, great job, you messed up, keep going, or hey, stop cussing, cut that out, and hand signals can do that. At 10 feet or yards, I can have a conversation with them, but again, they're in flow state. So what good does it me do to say, Tommy, stop, look at me, I'm going to teach you something real quickly? No, you're breaking up their flow and you're interrupting their opportunities. And again, you're taking away their opportunity to explore and learn and make mistakes and grow. So at 10, it's got to be like Twitter talk. It's really short. It's for the general public because everybody can hear it, and it's going to be useful for everybody. Hands up in the zone, drop back on D, whatever, cover the passing lanes, things like that. at 1 foot or 1 yard, they're out of the game and they're with me. If as a coach, if I really feel like I'm robbing my kids of the opportunity at learning moments from me and my experience and all the licensing and stuff I've done, I use that 1 foot conversation for that. Tommy comes out of the game. We sit down on the bench and I say to Tommy, so what do you think? How'd it go out there? Well, I did this, and this. What could you have done differently? Oh, coach, next time I'd really like to do this. Why? Well, I think if I did it this way, this would happen. What would it look like if you did that way? Well, this, and this. Great. You just solved the problem. When you go out there next time, give that a shot, right? Or I could say, you're on the right track. Here's a suggestion. Like I can use my knowledge with that kid there. But again, game time. They've got to be able to explore and try it and everything. Training is where I might have the opportunities to layer in what I know to help them.
I was going to say, so you've spoken a lot about game time there. What does Reed Maltbie's training sessions look like now? How have they changed over the years based on what you know about psychology, the psychosocial side, based on you're trying to imprint great code on the brain?
So in the beginning, I was 16, 17, 18. I tried to brain dump as much as I could in every practice. So every practice was just like it is right now, a constant stream of conversation from me. And I tried to teach everything at once. So my kids showed up at practice, and instead of giving them classes throughout the week, I just taught them science, math, biology, religion, language, all in one class. I shifted gears like, okay, do the multiplication table. Now, in biology, I just shifted from class to class. So the poor kids were just, wow, it's drinking from a fire hose. Now I'm more of very targeted. I use the training sessions to really target specific technical and tactical skills with the kids. Today's session is only going to be about this. If I see an opportunity to potentially correct something that everybody on the team is doing in another area, of course, we'll talk about it. But everything I want to do in this session is really focused in on this one thing I want the kids to take away and learn, the learning objectives and the takeaways, right? Just like a math teacher would. And it may be more than one. But, you go in with learning objectives and what you expect your athletes to take away from it. And my sessions really focus in on that. And then they become less stream of conversation, and they become more Socratic, one. They've become much more Socratic. And two, they become much more the use of silence and the use of peer-assisted learning. So they mimic the classroom for me. I get them out there and I get them playing and I tell them, here's the learn. Sometimes I don't even tell them what our training session theme is. I let them try to figure it out because then I know if I'm on the right track. If I get 5 minutes in and my kids have no idea what we're working on today, I didn't do my job well to design this training session, right?
Yeah.
But everything leads, even warm-ups, everything always leads back to whatever it is, that one concept I'm trying to teach. So I actually structured the warm-ups to fit what I was teaching. If we're talking about showing both feet, getting into a space where our teammates can see both feet, in other words, finding open space and stuff like that, then warm-up was centered around that. And then so the first lesson was centered around that. But then I get them in the plane. And once I get them in the plane, that's where I may freeze. I do a quick freeze in and out. And again, no stream of conversation. It's freeze, take a look. What do you see? How do we solve it? What if we did that? Go. And then back in. And I always start them with that success. All right, you see what you can do now to actually solve the puzzle. So on the touch we begin, and I already start them towards that success. And if they don't get it, freeze. Let's try it again. Boom. And then they're back in it. And it becomes that, like I said, very Socratic. I may have the answer. And Dan, I don't want to discount what we do because we are professionals. We do have answers for the kids, but we don't want to spoon feed them to the kids. They need to come upon them on their own, just like we would if we were teaching them anything else, a trade or something. They've got to do the work and get their hands dirty, and we're there to sort of guide and spotlight things and sometimes stop them and give them answers because they're going to hurt themselves or they're, so I may have the answers, but it's always, what do you see? What do you think? How it's a question, very questioning. And then my hope is, like Mark Bennett says, at some point in time, I'm completely pulled away and they're actually speaking to each other and educating each other. And that's the peer-assisted piece. As I try to get to a point where the athletes are teaching each other and having meaningful conversations with each other, and then I'm just dipping in when I need to help support it. I walk away from a training session and I go, holy cow, I maybe said 50 words tonight. I feel like I failed it. But then I watch them and I see that they picked up everything. They hit everything on my list, on my session plan. And I'm like, holy cow. But they discovered it. They figured it out. They came to those conclusions. In other words, they owned everything about it. And when somebody is forced to learn something through trial and error on their own, it's imprinted much deeper than if I just said, freeze, do this, go.
So what I hear you say there is that you're setting a specific learning objective, a theme, if you like, and there will be some directive coaching. If we split it into directive coaching and non-directive coaching, there will be some directive coaching, possibly at the beginning. And as players start to train, there's a keen mix of silence and then that non-directive coaching, which is more peer-assisted, a peer-assisted sort of form of education, and Socratic questioning. So quite a lot of your coaching is what I would describe as non-directive from you as a coach, with some moments of directive coaching, with some moments of instruction.
Yeah, I think there's always going to be those moments where they hit a puzzle they can't solve, and I look for those frustration moments where there are certain kids you want them to try to solve the puzzle on their own. Like I said earlier, we do have the knowledge, and we do want to give them the answer, but how much more powerful is it if we just guide a little bit and give them hints so that they come to the answer on their own? They come to the answer we had in our head, but they earned that answer through their own work. Like I said, it imprints deeper, and it creates this deep sense of competence and significance and ownership and all that. But there are times where we just freeze. Okay, here's the answer, because I'm looking for the frustration signs. When kids, it could be body language shows frustration, shoulders down or fists clenched, or, they yell out, ah, or they look to you. When they just keep looking to you with that look in their eyes, okay, they've hit that point where they're at burnout. If I don't solve the problem for them, they're going to be like, it's Vygotsky's zone of proximal development, which pulling in education, but it's a psych piece, right? And most people are aware of it. I put them in a zone where they have most proximal output. This is where they belong. This is where they're not too challenged that they're to the point where they're going to quit, but they're not so bored that they're going to quit. They're right in that good zone, and I'm looking for that. But when I see those kids dip into either side of that zone, you can see the body language, the eyes, even things they say. I can't get this stupid then that's when I'm going to step in and say, okay, let me see what let me put video for you. Here's what I'm seeing, and I demonstrate it for them. Or I talk, so try this. And then they get it, and there you go, you got it, do it again. There you go, how's that feel? Get that feeling again. So there is opportunity for the directive, but even with the youngest of kids, letting them, knowing the answer, but letting them figure it out with some guidance is so much more powerful in that learning environment for them.
I love what you've said there. Now, I'm curious. I'm curious to know all the things you've said there. So things like silence and peer-assisted questioning, Socratic questioning, focusing on one specific learning objective, all of the tools and the techniques you use as a coach. You used this word challenge about 30 seconds ago. What is the most challenging thing there for Reed Maltbie to execute? What do you find tough in coaching?
Two things. One is the confidence, the grit, I guess, to stick to it, because for patience and grit. Patience, because sometimes it takes times with the kids. And one team, you may go into that approach where you're like, I'm going to be very Socratic and I'm going to be non-directive, and it's going to be a learning environment. And see, what you need to understand is, as the coach, I can control the learning environment. That's what I'm trying to do. I'm not trying to teach the kids. I'm trying to develop the learning environment so that they can learn within the proper environment. There are times where you just have to have patience, because some teams or some particular kids, it just takes a little longer. And it's being able to stick with it and say, okay, I'm 4 weeks into the season and I feel like I'm totally failing this here. Wait, okay, human beings, they're all very different. They all work on a vast spectrum of development abilities, psychologically and emotionally and physically and all that. We've got to trust we've got to trust it. The other one is that grit of, I can recall colleagues saying to me, coming over and going, what the heck are you doing? What is wrong with you? Or this isn't what we do at our club. But get with the program here, buddy. I remember being in a club where I had that team, the 11-year-olds. We ran 3 different formations. We ran the old German W. We loved the old German W. Why? because that's where my strength was. We figured out that my team was the strongest running the German. So I was playing to the strengths of the kids I had on my team. It wasn't about formation. It was about putting the kids where they best performed. And I can remember somebody coming over and going, we don't run that formation in the club. You're supposed to run only the 4-4-2. What are you doing? I was like, but this is how they play their best. This is where the best performance comes out of these kids, and this is where they're most comfortable. And so I was like, but at the same time, they knew 3 formations, and they changed formation one time mid-game. Coach, this isn't working. Can we go to the such and such? I'm like, yeah, go for it. At that point, they were 13. They were 11v11. But it's like, holy cow. But it was having that grit to say, hey, look, I totally respect what you're saying. I respect you as a colleague, but I got a process, and I'm going to trust it,
Absolutely, absolutely. The future of coaching. So do you think the stuff we've spoken about, do you think we'll reach this divine elixir whereby every coach in every sport is turning up the volume of software, of psychosocial, whether they're putting it first or they place a great emphasis on it, and coaching courses are equipped to coach the coaches about this area? Do you think that's going to happen? And you're allowed to not be this amazing optimist that you are. I mean, because it's going to be one giant leap. What's your thoughts? Because I don't know if we'll ever reach there.
I'm worried. And the only reason I'm worried is because of that conversation I relayed earlier, and because of situations where it's like, I've seen it. Some of us will go into a large conference or into a group and we'll present this, and all of the participants are like, oh my gosh, my coaching game went to the next level after your presentation. I applied A, B, and C. I got one group, my 110-1 rule, they applied it across the league. And it's like, it's just going so great. But the next year you go, hey, I'd love to come back. And no, we're going a different direction. Oh, wow. We rotate through, and it's like,
you've had that. You've had that.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. It's like, fine, but bring somebody else in. Bring in a Dan. Bring in Bill Best. Bring in somebody who's And so that's the worry, and I think I think it comes down to this again. This fear of change. This fear of There are a lot of people who've been doing this for a very long time, and it's scary to change over to something like this. It looks silly. Like I've had people say, I've done a whole thing on the Warriors Not Winners where we're talking about building these 5 psychological competencies into athletes: locus of control and motivation, intrinsic motivation, internal locus of control, competitive nature, goal-setting mentality, all of that. And I get done, and a guy raises his hand and says, that's great, but that seems like snowflake-ish. I don't do that at my sessions. And then I show a video of the New Zealand All Blacks, and I go, let me ask you something. Would you ever walk up to one of those guys and say, you're a snowflake? Well, heck no, they're the toughest and greatest athletes on the planet. Okay, they're doing everything we just talked about. So if they're doing it, why aren't you doing it with your 15-year-olds? And so there's this mentality that what we're doing is a soft skill, or it's so flippin' scary, or people will lose ground. I've had coaches say to me, or administrators who had whole groups of coaches, if I start doing that, man, I'm going to, I got to guarantee I have a job next year. I'm telling you now, you do this, you're definitely going to have a job next year, because performance is going to go through the roof, because it's no longer outcome-based, it's mastery and process-based. That's one side. But the optimist in me says, at some point in time, because we figured it out in Silicon Valley, we started realizing it wasn't the hardware, it was the software. And we started talking about AI and all that, At some point in time, we're going to figure out, gosh, the software is so vital, because that's where we need to start. We need to erase any malware, and we need to start installing the right good code on the brains of our kids, not just for the sake of sport, but for life. Because everybody, you get in a room with 100 coaches and you say, raise your hand if you want all your kids to be amazing human beings 20 years from now. What do you really want for your kids 20 years from now? And they raise their hand, and then they say, I want them to have these values, and I want them to have these character traits, and I want them to do this. And that's the dream of any coach. No matter how hardened they are, they all want that. Well, that's the software, folks. That's the piece of the puzzle that's missing. And so that's my hope, is that people shift to software, because like I said, that was my evolution. If you look at when I explained the very first training session that I did to what I'm doing now, I went from building hardware to writing code. And that's all my training sessions was I focused on the brain and the heart of the kids, and then used the code that was being written on the brain and the hearts to run the hardware of those kids. Once I had them in the right place, it was so much easier for them to perform physically the skills and tactics I was trying to teach them.
Well, Reed, you're doing some great stuff in this space, and I know that there's going to be a lot of people listening in who would like to learn more about your new venture. So what's coming up? How can they be involved in any capacity, and how can they get in contact?
Oh, gosh, I would love, as you know, Dan, we're all doing this together, and so that's one of the reasons why I wanted to talk to you. It's not just, it's all of us. I would love for people to get involved with our think tank. You're one of the members of it, and we've got 60 people. We got you, we got Richard Bailey, we got Ian Barker from United Soccer Coaches. We've got, the lineup, Doug Limoff from Teach Like a Champion.
I love Doug.
We've got like 6 or 7 governing bodies. We've got people from Australia, player development projects on board. We got some amazing people on board. Kevin Kirk, who Patrick Reed is his athlete.
Yeah, I know. I've met Kevin, actually, funnily enough. Yeah, I know Kevin.
Yeah, he's a great guy. So we've got a phenomenal lineup of people. And the whole idea with the think tank, if you go to thinktank2019.com, is and this is the other reason why I think that we're moving in the right direction, hopefully with coaching, is it's about solutions. Mm-hmm. We're going to stop talking about what's wrong or stop talking about what we can do, and our speakers are going to give you solutions. Here's what you should do now. And so it's changing that narrative, because the narrative for 10 years now has been, this is what's wrong, and this is what you're doing wrong. And I want to move into, okay, but here's what you can do. That's right. And so I would check out thinktank2019.com. I would actually check in first with Dan, because I've Dan's got a link for you that you want to use. And then the other projects that I've got going is, because of all of this psych piece that I want to do, I got into doing work with some volleyball groups where we were doing coach evaluation. And I was actually, you were talking about coaching skills earlier, soft skills. I was actually putting the video on mute and evaluating them just based on body language and positioning and just all facial expressions and the kids' reactions physically to them and everything. And so that got me down a road where I'm doing this mentorship program that's going to be 6 months. And it's because, like I said, I don't have all the answers, but I'll go find them. I'll stand on the shoulders of giants for you. As a coach, if you don't want to dig into the research, I will. It's 6 months. I'll put people in cohorts. We'll work in a large cohort. I'll work one-on-one with you a couple times a month. I'll work in masterminding group with the larger cohort. We'll have online courses. We'll have experts coming in and doing webinars, and I'll do video analysis with you. So you'll video yourself coaching games and training sessions, and then I'm not going to focus on what you're coaching. I'm going to focus on how you're coaching and really go into the art and science behind how you're setting the learning environment. It's all based on, child development and sports psychology. So those are the two big ones coming up for me, is getting through the think tank and then getting through Coach's Realm, I'm calling it. It's REALM, coachesrealm.com. And those are the two big ones I've got going. And like I said, I'm looking forward to them, because selfishly, to be in a think tank and be part of masterminds with coaches, it's only going to make me better. That's why I want to do it, is because it's then we're advancing everything. We're advancing the science, and we're advancing the profession in general.
And how can people get in contact with you, mate?
So you can find me at coachreed.com. You can find me on Twitter at coach_Reed. Instagram is the same, coach_Reed. And if you search for Raising Excellence with Coach Reed on Facebook, you'll find me there. If you're interested in the think tank, check with Dan first, because he probably, you and I were going to talk, we'll probably do a discount code for all your friends.
Absolutely.
So I would check with you first. But you can find out more about Coach's Realm. Coaches, CoachesRealm.com is what I'm calling Mentor Mind program that'll start in July.
Brilliant, absolutely, and I'm personally really excited to be involved in your think tank program. Look, Reed, thank you so much, mate. That was awesome. You've always got so much to say about this area, and we certainly think alike. And we'll get there. We'll get there, won't we? We'll keep on pushing that notion of software and psychosocial, and I think we should make a bit of a dent anyway in the coaching community. So thanks so much, mate.
Dan, thank you so much. It's been an honor.
Well, I really enjoyed that podcast, and I'd love to hear what you, the listener, thinks. So please do get in touch via Twitter or Facebook or through my website danabrahams.com to tell me exactly what you think of the Sports Psych Show. And if you have any suggestions, I'd be delighted to hear them. I've got a great guest lined up for next week, so I look forward to next week's episode. Bye for now.